About 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I was in my early 20s and I was living the I am gonna be famous someday life. I was never a good student and I was always the class clown. One thing that I always did well as a kid was make my friends laugh. Instead of going to college or getting a job right after high school, I decided I was going to become a stand up comedian. Spoiler alert, I did not become a famous comedian, which maybe is the best joke of my stand up career. Instead, I had nearly a decade of bombing on stage, and even worse than that, the most terrifying single handed experience of my life happened to me. For a little bit of context, doing stand up is hard and definitely not lucrative when you are not successful. Not to mention, stand up comedy was not as popular as it is today. To say it is a grind is an understatement. Most of the time, these shows would be several hours away if I were lucky. Usually, they were even further than that. I did a few shows, and this is where the grind gets real. It's also where my story takes a very terrifying turn. I didn't have very good luck with these traveling shows. I wasn't getting paid, and I was driving 4 or 5 hours across state lines just for 5 minutes of exposure. Not an ideal situation for someone who's broke and barely had any income coming in. One night, I had an amazing opportunity to perform at a show that was being held 5 hours from where I lived. This show was a competition for comedians trying to break into the mainstream. The first place prize was $1,000, but the real prize for me was that several moderately famous comedians were going to be the judges of this show. It was my chance to show actual comedians that I have talent. Worst part of me when I would make all these trips was that I had a garbage car and an old cell phone that was about as reliable as those big 1980s brick cell phones. I would always think to myself that if something happened, I would be stranded. My drives almost always consisted of nothing but farmland on open fields as far as you could see. Because I was a lazy person, I didn't bother to double check my printed out MapQuest directions. Instead, I decided to wing it, something I still regret to this day. I was lost. The directions I had did not match where I was. I had been on a backcountry road for some time and I had no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. Thankfully, I always left for the traveling jobs early just in case I got lost. I may have been lazy, but I know myself well and getting lost was not uncommon for me. It was still daylight when I started driving through a small town. Honestly, calling it a small town might be a stretch. There were a few beat up old buildings and houses on a street that may be a couple of 100 feet in length. Outside of an old gas station, there were a few individuals who looked less than welcoming. I know that's kind of rude to say they were dirty and mean, but they were rude to me. They didn't look like they were using or anything like that. They just looked like they had been beaten up by life. I asked where I was and tried asking them if I was on the right track. They were short with me, and after an awkward back and forth exchange, they finally told me where I needed to go. According to the rude townspeople, I was still somewhat on the right track. Somehow I had missed a turn a while back, but if I stayed straight on this road for a while, eventually I would see the road I needed to be on. I thanked them and filled up my tank before I set off again. While I was pumping the gas, I noticed several of the people I had just talked to were staring at me. It was uncomfortable for sure. It was those dead eye stares, and it wasn't just one of them. I counted at least 4 of them just staring and standing completely still like a statue. It made me feel all sorts of weird. I finished up and got out of that small town as fast as I could. I started driving and rehearsing my routine to myself. I kept thinking about how ironically funny my conversation with the townspeople was, and I even tried thinking of ways that I could incorporate this experience into my stand-up routine. Not long after leaving the town, a bit of white pickup truck flew by me going very fast. I didn't think anything of it at the time. When it was around dusk, I had been driving for nearly an hour since I left the town. There was nothing but trees on the left and right sides of the road. I had that gut feeling that I was probably lost. As I continued down the road, I heard a loud sound from underneath my car and I started losing control of the vehicle. I knew right away what had happened. It was unmistakable. I had somehow gotten a flat tire. I pulled over to inspect the damage. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't just a flat tire. Both of my front tires were completely obliterated. When I leaned over to take a closer look, I noticed that the tires were impaled with several nails. I pulled out my terrible cell phone and of course, the service was not good. I tried calling a tow truck, but I had no idea where I was or even what road I was on. I hung up the phone and instead of panicking, I was starting to get angry that I was going to somehow miss the show. I was stupid and my priorities were elsewhere. I decided to call one of my friends. I described everything that I remembered about the drive and I told him about the small town with the gas station. He told me he was going to try to look up where I was and that he would call me back. I didn't know if I should just stay put in the car or I should try walking back in the direction of the town. I decided to stay put in the car because now that it was almost completely dark, it was starting to get cold. It was clear now that I wasn't going to make the show. While I was waiting to hear back from my friend, I noticed two bright headlights popping out from the horizon behind me. The headlights stopped moving a good distance from my car and didn't continue in my direction. The car was close enough that the lights were bright and annoying, but far away enough that I could not tell what kind of car it was. I don't know if it was a cop or some local trying to call the police to report a vehicle on the side of the road. If you are wondering why I didn't just call the police, it's because I was driving a car that was not inspected or properly insured at the time, and I wasn't trying to get that ticket in another state. Several minutes went by and the car never moved. It just stayed parked a good distance behind me, shining those bright lights. After probably a good 5 minutes or so, the bright lights started to get a little closer. The vehicle was slowly moving towards the back of my car. As that was happening, two more lights could be seen in front of me, making their way towards me quickly. The loud vehicle stopped inches from my car. Eventually, the car that was behind me was parked directly behind my car, and I still couldn't tell who it was. While I was trying to adjust my eyes to the bright light in my rearview mirror, I noticed that the car doors from the vehicle in front of me were now open. That's when I noticed it was a white pickup truck, the same beat up white pickup truck from earlier. Before I could notice anyone coming, I heard a loud bang on the driver's window and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the rude man from the gas station. I started to panic because the man was trying to open my car door. Even though it was locked, he was aggressively pulling on the door. He started to beat on the car window. I wasn't sure how long my window would last before it broke. As this was going on, I noticed one of the other men from the car make his way to the passenger side of my car and he also started to aggressively try to open the door. I was trying to yell at them to stop, but it was like they didn't understand what I was saying. They were just grunting and smashing the car doors. The guy at the driver's side door stopped trying to break in for a moment and instead just stood there staring directly at me. It was just like those vacant stares from the gas station earlier. I can't even begin to explain how horrible that moment was. With no notice at all, he just started screaming, and it wasn't just a normal scream. He was howling and screaming at the top of his lungs. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but I decided that the best course of action was for me to just try and get out of the car and run. I pushed open the door as hard as I could, and thankfully it was enough force to knock the man over. I ran as fast as I could into the woods, but instead of running blindly into the pitch black forest, I decided to dive to the ground only several feet into the woods. I hoped that these guys would think I ran deeper into the woods, and thankfully that's exactly what happened. Moments later, I heard footsteps of several people running by me. When I was sure I heard all of them run by, I quietly got up and ran back to my car. Surprisingly, my backpack and cell phone were still in the car. I grabbed them, stayed low, and just ran as fast as I could down the road. The entire time I was running, I expected them to jump out of the woods, but I never saw them again. About half an hour later, I was able to flag down a passing car. The woman was kind. I don't know if I would have been so nice and trusting of a screaming man in the middle of nowhere. She called the authorities and even let me sit in her car until the police showed up. I told the cops everything, but as you might expect, there really wasn't anything they could do. There was no evidence of anything malicious other than some small dents in the car door. And given the condition of my car, the cops didn't really believe the dents were caused by them. I also received a couple of tickets for my car, which is just the icing on the cake for this story. I never found out why those people targeted me or what they wanted with me. Clearly, they were not trying to help. All things considered, I am lucky that I am here telling this story. In late June, I broke up with my boyfriend, who I had been dating for 5 years at that point. It was a messy breakup. One of the things that got me through the breakup was that my friend Sarah had just dumped her boyfriend as well. Having someone to spend time with who was also going through the same situation was such a blessing. Strangely, our bonding through misery and grief helped us both to move on. A few weeks after the breakup, our friend Alisa invited Sarah and I on this cross-country trip she was going to be taking. Ordinarily, I would never do something like that. The anxiety alone would be enough for me to melt away, but for some reason, this time it sounded like a fun girls' trip. All three of us are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can take time off for a trip like this. Alisa basically lives on the road. She's always traveling and finding these insane places all over the country. She's always been such a free spirit and lives for adventure. Sarah and I were much more sheltered. We decided to let Alisa basically be the captain of our little crew for the trip. She planned it all out, and we were all going to be there for the ride. The first day or so was a little rough for me. I just wasn't used to winging it, but after that, I started really enjoying myself. On the second or third day, we drove by this insane looking barn. It was definitely abandoned. There was no sign of human life anywhere. The farm looked like it had been completely overgrown by nature. Alisa was begging us to go inside, but I wasn't feeling it. Alisa was adamant that clearly nobody lived there. She was obviously correct, but I just couldn't bring myself to trespass. It's also worth not noting that I am just a huge baby. Not wanting to trespass was my excuse, but I was actually scared of someone squatting inside the barn. I had listened to one too many true crime podcasts, and I wasn't about to get kidnapped by some insane backwoods farm man. After a few minutes of arguing, Alisa gave up and we decided to keep moving on with our trip. The next week of traveling was amazing. We went sightseeing all over the countryside. Alisa showed us places and things that were truly incredible. We partied in bars in small towns, slept on a mountain, and met awesome people from all different walks of life. It really was incredible. The only thing that was a little annoying was that throughout the entire trip, Alisa kept bringing up that barn. While we were driving back to civilization, Alisa basically begged us to get a closer look at the barn. I don't know if it was the trip that made me come out of my shelf a little bit, or just days of Alisa breaking us down, but I was starting to warm up to the idea. I told her that if it looks like nobody had been there in years, then we should check it out. I was confident that most likely nobody had been there, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out in the universe. I wasn't even 100% sure that Alisa could get us back there, but that girl is amazing sometimes. She knew exactly how to get there. We spotted the barn around 4:30 p.m. We drove the SUV on the dirt and grass and parked it several yards away from the barn. We didn't want to park right on top of the place just in case some scary farm man was living inside. Alisa was like a kid on Christmas. She ran to the barn door first. It was crazy in that place. I'm pretty sure the vines were holding the building up. It almost sounded like the place was breathing, but I'm pretty sure that that was just the integrity of the building slowly falling apart. The weirdest part was all this strange equipment that was still inside the barn. It didn't look like any farm equipment I have ever seen before, but I am not a farmer, so maybe it was just older stuff. It looked like stuff you would find in a medieval dungeon. After we explored and took a bunch of pictures inside the barn, Alisa wanted us to check out the farmhouse that was connected. At this point, I was fully invested, so she didn't have any pushback from me. We had to kick down the door because it was somehow wrapped into the frame and it wasn't opening. Inside, it was both creepy and sad. It was definitely empty and abandoned. It's not like the previous owner had furniture and stuff like that inside. It was empty other than a small green table and a green wooden chair. What was sad was that I couldn't stop thinking about the people who had most likely lived there before. I mean, it was a farm at one point. Somebody had to have lived there before, and now it's just forgotten by history. We explored the house, and I imagined it could have been a cute little house at one point. After a while of just hanging out and talking inside the small house, Alyssa and Sarah both make a crazy suggestion. They suggested we stay inside the farmhouse that night. Obviously, this seems like it would be a horrible idea. But at that moment, it seemed wild and exciting. And at this point of the trip, I was here for it. We had been hanging out there so long already that I didn't realize it was almost 7 p.m. We went back to the car and grabbed our stuff. We ate some subs from the cooler, then drank a few beers and talked about the trip some more. Around 9, we started setting up our sleeping bags. We all set our alarms for 6 a.m. so we could get right on the road in the morning. We were all exhausted at this point, so it didn't take us long to pass out. I'm a light sleeper, so I was tossing and turning for a while and going in and out of consciousness. I must have finally fallen asleep briefly, because around 3 a.m. something strange woke me up. I swear I thought I heard someone make a shish sound. I rose from the sleeping bag and scanned the room the best I could with only the moonlight faintly shining through the vines on the window. I didn't see or hear anything. My best guess was that either Alyssa or Sarah had just been snoring or something. I laid back down and shut my eyes. Almost instantly, I jumped up because there was a loud bang at the door. It was like someone crashed into the door, and remember, we had to break down the door, so it was basically just propped up against the door frame. If this really was a person, they could easily just push down the door. The bang on the door was loud enough that it woke up Alyssa and Sarah. Both were just as startled as I was. We all sat there frozen, basically holding our breaths, listening for another sound. Instead of a loud bang, we started to hear these soft and delicate taps coming from the window, which was on the other side of the room. Then the banging on the door started again. This wasn't the wind or the creaky barn. This was for sure people. People who clearly knew we were inside. We all huddled up together and panicked. It's easy to say what you would do in this situation, but I promise you, you would probably be paralyzed as well. The banging on the door stopped and then the door was pushed open. Two skinny men and one skinny woman walked inside. I would say all of them were maybe late 30s. They didn't rush in or do anything insane. Instead, they just slowly walked in and stood in front of us. Somehow, just walking in normally like that was scarier. Sarah started to scream, and in response to Sarah screaming, one of the men started screaming. It was like he was mirroring her scream. The woman of the group started to shush Sarah. The man in the middle of the group started to gesture with his hand almost like a mime. I didn't even realize until that moment that all three of them were holding a weird mask that they put on after the man was done gesturing. The masks were so weird. I know that's vague, but I have never quite seen masks like that before. The guy in the middle put on a mask that was just a purple giant cube. That's it. No face or anything, just a purple cube. The man, the one who was screaming, put on a mask that kind of looked like a homemade Batman mask that was made of cardboard. Then the woman put on what looked like a medical mask with plastic icicles you would hang up on the holidays, hanging on each side of the mask almost like tusks. They slowly started creeping closer to us, and the more we panicked, the louder and more irritated they became. As we screamed, they started to scream as well. The woman grabbed my shoulders, and because she was so skinny, I was able to push her down. The distraction caused the two men to look at the woman. The guy with the purple cube mask shouted that I was going to pay for that. Sarah had a small can of paper spray on her keychain and started spraying in the direction of the masked people. It gave us enough of a window to run by them. The woman grabbed my ankle as we ran, but I was able to free myself quickly. As I was running away, I looked back and saw the woman reaching behind her in her waistband. I ran to the car as fast as I could. I did not want to wait and find out what she was reaching for. We could still hear them screaming from inside the farmhouse. They didn't chase us for some reason. I remember my vision being a little messed up as well from the spray that must have been in the air as we ran out of the house. We drove away as fast as we could and make it back home in record time. We didn't actually report this to the police because we figured we are the ones that technically trespassed. Maybe those were the owners, even though I seriously doubt that. One of the scariest parts of this whole ordeal, for me at least, is that we have no idea where those people came from. They just suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. We explored that entire barn that afternoon and there was no sign of life. No food, no footsteps, no footprints in the dust, no car, nothing. These deranged, mask-wearing lunatics just showed up out of nowhere with the sole purpose of harming us in some way. I'm still not over the mental scars from that trip. I'm happy I got that girl's trip out of my system, but I'm good if I never go on another cross-country up trip again. I'll settle for a nice staycation next time.